She called the most dangerous man she knew, because he was the only one who made her feel safe. 4 years. She kept her distance, kept it professional, kept herself convinced that what she felt every time Luca Moretti walked into a room was nothing more than gratitude, nothing more than loyalty, nothing more than the particular madness of working too close to a man like that for too long. Then Evan's hand connected with her face, and every wall she'd built came down in a single breath. Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Hit like, subscribe, and don't you dare leave before the end. The rain came down hard that Tuesday in October, the kind of rain that didn't care about umbrellas or intentions or the careful plans people made to keep their lives intact. It came straight and cold and relentless, hammering the windows of the third-floor apartment on Caldwell Street where Serena Vale had lived for 2 years and which had stopped feeling like home sometime around last spring when she'd stopped being able to leave it without someone asking where she was going and when she'd be back, and who exactly she thought she was dressing like that for. She was standing at the kitchen counter when Evan came home. She heard his key in the lock and felt her shoulders rise before she could stop them. That was new. That involuntary flinch toward the sound of his key. Or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe she'd just gotten good at pretending it wasn't there. "You're still in that dress," Evan said. Not hello. Not how was your day. Just that. "You're still in that dress." Serena kept her back to him. She was pouring water into a glass, and she focused on that. The water, the glass, the simple mechanics of a simple task. Because if she turned around too fast, he'd read something into it, and she didn't have the energy tonight for whatever he'd read into it. "I just got home 20 minutes ago," she said. "Haven't changed yet. You've been wearing that since this morning." "Evan, I wore it to work. I wore it home. That's what people do." She heard him set his camera bag down on the floor, heard the particular weight of it, and then his footsteps across the hardwood. He moved the way he'd always moved, quietly, deliberately. And there was a time when she'd found that quality in him appealing. Now it made the back of her neck prickle. "I saw you today," he said. She turned then. She couldn't help it. He was standing 5 feet away, still in his jacket, rain damp at the shoulders, his face arranged in that careful neutral expression that she had learned over the last year meant the opposite of neutral. "You saw me." Coming out of the Meridian building, with him. The Meridian building was where Moretti Group had its offices, where Serena had worked for 4 years, where she spent approximately 50 hours of every week. Luca Moretti was her employer, her boss, the man whose calendar she managed, whose contracts she coordinated, whose operational logistics she had spent 4 years becoming indispensable to. "I work there," she said. "I come out of that building every day." "You were laughing." She stared at him. "Evan, you were laughing with him, standing on the sidewalk. You touched his arm." The glass was still in her hand. She set it down carefully on the counter because she was suddenly aware of how much she wanted to throw it. And she was not that person. She had never been that person, and she wasn't going to become that person because of whatever this was turning into. "He said something funny," she said, and her voice was steady, and she was proud of that steadiness, even though every word felt like it was being dragged out of gravel. "I laughed. I touched his arm for approximately 1 second. He's my boss, Evan. That's it. That's the entire story." "That's not how it looked." "I don't know what to tell you about how it looked. I can only tell you what it was." "You never laughed like that with me." There it was. Under all the surveillance and the accusations and the carefully constructed architecture of suspicion, there was always that. The wounded center of it, the thing that made her feel guilty, even when she'd done nothing, even when she had examined her own conscience so many times that the examining had become its own kind of exhaustion. "We don't laugh much anymore," she said quietly. "I've noticed that too." Something shifted in his face. She'd learned to watch for that shift, the way his features would reorganize themselves when the wounded center got too close to the surface and the defensiveness came rushing up to cover it. "Because you're always somewhere else," he said. "Even when you're here, you're somewhere else." "Evan, I'm tired. I worked 11 hours today. Where were you Thursday night?" She blinked. "What?" "Thursday night. You said you were working late, but Marcus saw you at Calloway's, the bar on 5th. Marcus. She cataloged that. Marcus was Evan's friend from college, a quiet man with small eyes who'd always made her vaguely uneasy, and whom she now understood had been providing Evan with some kind of informal geographic surveillance of her movements. "I had drinks with Helena and Priya after we finished a proposal," she said. "They're my colleagues. You've met Helena. You didn't tell me." "I didn't think I needed to file a report." His jaw tightened. "Don't be like that." "I'm not being like anything. I went to a bar with 2 women I work with. We had 2 rounds and I was home by 10. You were out late yourself that night, as I recall, and I didn't ask you for a detailed accounting of your evening." "That's different." "How?" He didn't answer that. He never answered that because there was no answer to that that wouldn't expose the basic unfairness of the entire architecture. The tracking app he'd installed on her phone 6 months ago, the browser history he checked, the way her friendships had quietly suffocated under the weight of his vigilance until Helena and Priya were really the only people she had left. And even those friendships existed only inside the walls of work. "You need to quit," he said. She felt the air leave the room. "Excuse me?" "Moretti, you need to quit. Get another job. One where you're not working 60 hours a week for some guy who—" "Don't." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Don't finish that sentence." "Serena, I have worked for Luca Moretti for 4 years. I built that career. I earned that position. I'm not quitting because you saw me laugh on a sidewalk. It's not just the laugh. Then what is it? Tell me exactly what it is, because I'm standing here trying to understand what I've actually done wrong, and I cannot find it." His face changed again. Later, she would try to identify the exact moment it changed, try to pinpoint the thing that pushed him past whatever internal threshold he maintained between cruelty and the simulation of reason, but she couldn't find it. It happened fast. One second she was looking at his face, and the next second his hand was around her wrist. Not gentle. Not the kind of grip that could be explained away as urgency or frustration, or the clumsy excess of emotion. His fingers closed around her wrist with specific, deliberate pressure, and he yanked her toward him, and something small and breakable inside her went absolutely quiet in the way that things go quiet right before something goes very wrong. "Evan," she said, and her voice surprised her. Calm, flat, the voice of someone operating on a frequency below panic. "You're not hearing me," he said. His face was close to hers now, and she could see the rain damp in his hair and the particular darkness in his eyes that she didn't have a name for but recognized. "You're hurting my wrist. I need you to hear me." "I hear you. Let go of my wrist." He didn't let go. He pulled harder, and she stumbled forward a step. And in the stumbling, she hit the edge of the counter, her hip, her elbow, and made an involuntary sound of pain, and she saw something flicker in his expression that might have been regret or might have been satisfaction, and she couldn't tell which, and the inability to tell which was perhaps the worst part of all of it. Then his other hand came up. She didn't see it coming. She should have. She'd been watching him for months, tracking his moods the way you track weather when you live somewhere prone to storms, and she should have seen it coming. But she didn't, and his palm connected with the side of her face. Not a slap, not exactly, more of a shove, a redirect, as if he was trying to move her and her face was just what his hand found, and the force of it turned her head hard to the left, and she hit the counter again, and this time she went down. The floor was cold. She noticed that, the cold of it against her knees, the rough edge of the cabinet against her shoulder. She noticed, too, that she wasn't crying. That felt significant somehow, in the moment, that she wasn't crying. Evan said something. She didn't hear it. There was a rushing sound in her ears that wasn't quite sound, and she was looking at the cabinet under the sink and thinking, with remarkable clarity, that she needed to get up. She got up. By the time she was on her feet, Evan had taken 2 steps back. His face was different now, whiter somehow, and his eyes had the look of a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't meant to approach. "Serena, don't," she said. That wasn't, don't." She walked to the bedroom. She did it without running, without stumbling, placing each foot with the particular deliberateness of someone making absolutely sure their legs will hold. She closed the bedroom door behind her and stood with her back against it and listened to the silence on the other side. He didn't follow. After a while, she heard the apartment door open and close. She stood in the dark for a long time. The rain was louder now, or maybe she was just more aware of it. She could feel the beginning of a bruise along her cheekbone. Not pain, exactly, Not yet, more like a heat, a pressure. The early announcement of something that would be more visible by morning. Her wrist ached where his fingers had closed around it. She didn't turn on the light. She stood in the dark and she thought about who she could call. It was a strange exercise, that inventory. She'd done it before. The mental accounting of who she had left, who was still in her life, who would pick up the phone at whatever time it was now and not ask questions she couldn't answer tonight. And the accounting came up short, the way it had been coming up short for months, because he'd been so good at that part, so methodical and patient about the slow erasure of the network around her, that she'd barely noticed it happening until it was nearly done. Her mother was 2 states away and they hadn't spoken properly in 8 months. Not since the last time Evan had been in the room while she was on the phone, and she'd cut the call short rather than endure the 45 minutes of questions she'd face afterward. Her friend Cassidy had stopped calling after Serena had canceled plans 3 times in a row, and Serena hadn't been able to explain the cancellations, hadn't been able to say the actual reason, and the friendship had died quietly from lack of tending. Helena and Priya were colleagues first. Good women. But this was not a thing you handed to a colleague. Not at... She checked her phone. 11:47 on a Tuesday night, standing in the dark in the bedroom of an apartment she no longer felt safe in, with the beginning of a bruise announcing itself along her face. She scrolled through her contacts. She stopped on a name. She stared at it for a long time. Luca Moretti. Work. The contact information she'd inputted herself years ago during her first week, when her predecessor had handed her a list of numbers and said, "Keep these close, you'll need them." His personal cell was on there because she sometimes needed to reach him outside business hours, for contract emergencies, for schedule changes, for the particular category of crisis that didn't keep office hours. She had never called it for anything personal. She had spent 4 years making absolutely sure she never had a reason to call it for anything personal. She pressed call. It rang once. Serena. His voice. That voice, but low and precise, and carrying the particular quality of a man who answers his phone at midnight without sounding surprised to be awake. She opened her mouth. What came out was not the controlled, professional, carefully managed version of herself she'd maintained for 4 years. What came out was a sound she'd been holding for much longer than tonight. A sound that had nothing to do with Luca Moretti specifically, and everything to do with 4 years of keeping herself together, and the particular way that effort collapses when you finally let one sound through. A breath, fractured at the edges. Silence. Then, "Where are you?" She told him. "Stay there," he said. "Don't open the door for anyone else." "I'm coming." She sat down on the edge of the bed in the dark and waited and listened to the rain. He arrived in 19 minutes. She knew because she watched the time on her phone, not to measure him, but because watching the numbers change was something to do with her hands and her eyes and the parts of her brain that would otherwise have too much space to fill with the replay of what had just happened. The knock at the door was 3 times, quiet, deliberate. "It's me," he said. She opened the door. Luca Moretti was not a large man exactly, not the way that word usually worked. He didn't dominate space through sheer physical mass the way some powerful men did. He was lean, controlled, dark-haired, with the particular kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the disciplined management of something that isn't calm at all. He was wearing a dark jacket over a shirt he'd clearly pulled on in a hurry, and behind him in this corridor were 2 men she recognized as members of his security detail and whose names she'd never learned. He looked at her face. She watched him look at it. Something happened behind his eyes, a change, a tightening, that he controlled in approximately 2 seconds. But those 2 seconds were visible if you knew what to look for, and she had spent 4 years learning what to look for with Luca Moretti. "Come on," he said, quietly. No drama, no flood of questions, no inventory of concern. Just, "Come on." "My things? We'll get them. Come on." She came on. In the car, black, long, with privacy glass, and the quiet of expensive engineering between them and the city outside. He didn't ask her immediately what had happened. He sat beside her in the back seat and didn't reach across the space between them and didn't fill the silence with anything. There was a bottle of water. He handed it to her without comment. She took it. His security detail was in the front seats. The driver's name she knew was Roland. She drank the water and watched the city slide past in the rain, and said nothing for a long time. "His name is Evan Mercer," she said finally. "We've been together 3 years." "I know," Luca said. She looked at him. "You know?" "You mentioned him early on, when you first started." A pause. "I pay attention." That landed somewhere she didn't examine too closely. "He hit me," she said. Not because she needed to explain herself, just because the sentence needed to exist somewhere outside her head. "I can see that. It wasn't—" She stopped. "I need you to know that it's not the kind of situation where I'm going to sit here and tell you it was the first time. But it was the first time he actually—" She stopped again, found different words. "It's been other things for a while. Tracking me, controlling who I see. It's been building. You don't have to explain yourself to me," Luca said. "I feel like I do." "You don't." She turned back to the window. Outside, the city looked the same as it always did, indifferent and bright and ongoing, entirely unconcerned with what happened in third-floor apartments on Caldwell Street. "I didn't know who else to call," she said. She felt him look at her. "I'm glad you called me," he said. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building she'd been to exactly twice before, for work, for meetings, and both times she'd paid no attention to it as a place where someone lived because it hadn't been relevant to think about it that way. Now she walked through it in the dark. Luca didn't turn on the main lights, only the lower ambient ones, as if he understood intuitively that harsh light was not what this night required, and she tried to take in the fact of it, floor-to-ceiling windows. The entire city from up here, compressed into light and grid, still going, still turning, entirely unaware of her. A guest room with a bed that had been made at some point by someone who knew how to make beds, with the particular tight geometry of hotel training, and she stood in the doorway of it and felt a sensation she hadn't felt in such a long time that it took her a moment to identify it. Safe. She felt safe. She stood in the guest room doorway and that feeling moved through her like something unwelcome. The way warmth feels unwelcome when you've been cold for so long, you've forgotten it's supposed to be the natural state. Luca appeared in the hallway with a first aid kit. She sat on the edge of the bed and he cleaned the cut along her cheekbone. A small one, from the counter edge, with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, who had reason to own a well-stocked first aid kit, and she didn't ask about that. His hands were steady. He didn't speak while he worked. He was close enough that she could smell the rain in his jacket and something underneath it, something warm in particular, and she kept her eyes on the far wall. "Sleep," he said when he was done. "Luca, it'll still be a disaster in the morning. Get some sleep first." He left. She lay down in her clothes on top of the covers, and outside the windows the city burned its usual restless burn, and she slept. She slept for 9 hours without dreaming. She woke to gray morning light and the particular disorientation of an unfamiliar ceiling and spent approximately 3 seconds reconstructing where she was and why, and then spent the next 30 minutes lying completely still, staring upward, taking a careful inventory of herself. Her cheek hurt. Her wrist hurt. Her hip was bruised from the counter edge. These were manageable. These were, she recognized with some grim irony, almost certainly less than they could have been. She found her phone on the nightstand. Evan had called 6 times, texted 7. She read the texts in the order they'd arrived. "Where are you?" "Serena, I'm sorry. Please come home. We need to talk." "I didn't mean it to happen like that." "Serena, answer me." "You're overreacting." That last one. She read it twice. She set the phone face down on the nightstand and got up. The kitchen smelled like coffee. Luca was at the counter, jacket gone, shirt sleeves pushed up, looking at something on a tablet. And he looked up when she came in without the slight adjustment that most people made when they saw the bruise on her face, that small, involuntary flinch of discomfort. He just looked at her and said, "Coffee's there." She poured herself a cup and stood at the counter across from him, and they regarded each other for a moment. "He's been calling," she said. "I know. My team is monitoring the situation." "Your team. You called me from the number you called me from. It gets monitored." She supposed she should have found that unsettling. She found she didn't. "I need to go back for my things," she said. "And I need to go to work. And I need to figure out—" She stopped. "There's a lot I need to figure out." "Stay here for now," he said. "The apartment isn't safe until we know what he's going to do." I can't just... Serena. He set the tablet down. I'm not trying to manage you. I'm asking you, as someone who has some experience with volatile situations, to give it 48 hours before you go back to that apartment alone. That's all. She wanted to argue with that. She had spent so long resisting the particular shape of men who told her what to do that her first instinct was a flat refusal, regardless of context, regardless of whether the request was reasonable. She recognized that about herself. She recognized that Evan's particular variety of control had made her suspicious of all control, even the reasonable kind, and that this was one of the things it had done to her that she most resented. 48 hours, she said. That's all I'm asking. She went to work. She went in a car from Luca's fleet, wearing yesterday's dress because she had no other choice, with a bruise on her face that she covered approximately halfway with makeup from the guest bathroom's inexplicably well-stocked cabinet, and she sat at her desk and did her job. Helena noticed. Helena was too smart not to notice. She stopped by Serena's desk mid-morning and put a cup of coffee on it and said quietly, "You don't have to tell me anything, but I'm here." Serena looked at her. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you are," Helena said. "That doesn't mean I'm not here." It was a small thing. It was the right thing. The workday moved. Contracts, calls, the particular logistics of a large operation with international reach that required constant management. Luca was in meetings for most of the day, and when she saw him in the corridor at 2 p.m, he asked, with a single look, whether she was all right, and she answered with a single nod, and that exchange contained more economy than most conversations she'd had in years. She was in her office at 4:30 when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Serena." Evan's voice. From a different phone then. "I need to see you." She looked at the wall, steady, steady. "No," she said. "Serena, listen to me." "No, Evan, don't call me from other numbers. Don't come to my building. I need some time and space right now, and I need you to respect that." "Space." His voice shifted. "You're with him, aren't you? You're at his..." She hung up. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, and she noticed that her hand was entirely steady, and that felt like something. Not triumph, too small for that, but something, a data point, a small specific evidence that she was still herself. She went to find Luca. He was in his office, still in the meeting she'd scheduled for 4, but his PA flagged her through, and she stood in the doorway until he concluded the call and looked up. "He called from a different number," she said. "He thinks I'm here with you. He'll escalate." Luca's expression didn't change. "Probably. I need to be smarter about this than I've been about everything else." Something shifted at the edges of his composure. Not much, just enough to be visible. "You weren't stupid," he said. "You were in a situation that was designed to make you doubt your own intelligence. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. "I need a lawyer," she said, "and I need to understand what my options are. I have people. I can make calls tonight." "I'm not asking you to make calls. I'm asking you to tell me who to call." The distinction mattered. She could see that he understood the distinction. "Marcus Hale," he said. "Family law, but he handles abuse cases. His number is in the company directory." A pause. "He's good. He won't try to take over." She wrote the name down. That night, back in the penthouse, she still felt strange calling the penthouse. Still felt strange about all of it. She sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine. She'd opened herself from the rack she'd asked permission to access, and she made a list. The things she knew. The things she needed to know. The things she needed to do. The list was longer than she expected. Halfway through making it, she stopped, because something had occurred to her, a detail, small and cold, that had been sitting at the edge of her memory since the night before, and which she'd been too overwhelmed to pull forward and examine directly. 3 months ago, she'd gotten a letter from a collections agency. She'd thought it was a mistake. Had called the number, gotten a runaround, meant to follow up, hadn't followed up because there was always something. Work, the exhausting labor of managing Evan's moods, the endless triage of a life that was quietly becoming unmanageable. She pulled out her laptop. She logged into her bank account. She sat very still for a long time, looking at the screen. Then she pulled up her credit report, the one she hadn't checked in almost a year because there'd always been a reason not to get to it. The report loaded. She read it once, then again. Then a third time, with the particular focused attention of someone who is looking for a different answer than the one they're getting. The answer didn't change. There were accounts on her credit report that she had never opened, credit cards she'd never applied for, a personal loan in her name from a bank she'd never used. The balances, the totals at the bottom of the screen, the aggregate of what someone had borrowed in her name and spent and left unpaid, added up to a number that made the wine glass feel suddenly precarious in her hand. She set it down. She sat in Luca Moretti's kitchen at 11 o'clock at night and looked at the financial wreckage that someone had been constructing in her name, quietly and methodically. And she thought about the tracking app and the controlled isolation and the careful management of her perception of herself. And she understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the slap had not been the beginning of anything. It had been the end of the useful part. When you were no longer useful to a certain kind of destruction, you got discarded, one way or another. She heard Luca's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, saw her face, and stopped. "What is it?" he said. She turned the laptop toward him. She watched him look at it, watched his expression do what it did, that controlled hardening, the same thing she'd seen when he looked at her bruise, except this time it was slower and colder and something else underneath it. Something she might have called fury if she'd ever seen that particular expression on Luca Moretti's face before, which she hadn't, which told her something about the scale of what she was looking at. "How long?" he said. "I don't know yet. I need to go through everything." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Show me from the beginning," he said. And Serena, who had spent the last year learning to carry things alone, opened the first document and started from the beginning. Outside the 43rd floor windows, the city burned on, indifferent and ongoing and bright. And somewhere in it, Evan Mercer was in an apartment or a bar or wherever men like that went after they'd crossed the line they'd been approaching for months. And he had no idea. No idea that the woman he'd spent 3 years carefully dismantling had found the one crack in the architecture of her isolation. No idea what was coming. If you're watching this from another city, drop it in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Part 2 is coming, and what Serena finds in those documents will change everything she thought she understood about the man she trusted her life to. The documents spread across the kitchen table like an autopsy. Serena had printed everything. The credit report, the bank statements she'd pulled from 3 different institutions using account numbers she hadn't recognized as hers until 20 minutes ago. The collections notices she'd stored in a folder on her laptop under a label that said, "Deal with later," because there had always been something more urgent than dealing with later. Now later was here, sitting under the kitchen light at 11:40 at night, and it was worse than she'd imagined it would be. Luca read without speaking. He turned pages with the same economy he brought to everything. No wasted motion, no performance of reaction. But she was watching his jaw, and his jaw was doing something. "This account," he said, pointing, "the Meridian credit line, opened 14 months ago." "I never opened a Meridian credit account." "I know. I'm looking at the address on the application. It's your building, but the email on file is not yours." She leaned over. He was right. The email was a variation of her name, Serena.Vale92 instead of Serena Valework. Close enough to pass a casual glance, different enough to route all correspondence somewhere she'd never see. "He did this from my apartment," she said. "Not a question." Luca set the page down. "We don't know that yet. He lived there. He had access to my mail, my documents, my—" She stopped, pressed her fingers flat against the table. "My social security card is in a file box in the bedroom closet. Has been for 2 years. I never thought about it, because why would I think about it?" The silence between them had a specific weight now. "Serena. How much?" She pulled the summary page toward her. She'd been avoiding the summary page. "How much total?" He didn't tell her to look away. She looked. The number sat there in plain black type, unhurried, indifferent to the fact that it represented 2 years of someone quietly gutting her financial life while she slept beside him, while she cooked dinner across from him, while she defended him to Helena, who'd said once, carefully, that Evan seemed like a lot of work, and Serena had said he just has anxiety, he's getting better, he loves me. $63,412. In debt she hadn't made, in her name, accruing interest she'd be responsible for until she proved otherwise. She sat back in the chair. Luca watched her. "Say something," she said. I'm thinking. Say that then. I'm thinking, he said again, and this time it was different. Not a deflection, just the literal truth, and she could see it. The particular quality of his stillness when he was actually processing, rather than simply controlling the appearance of processing. Marcus Hale does criminal cases too, he said after a moment. Not just family law, identity theft, financial fraud. This is federal territory, Serena. This isn't a civil matter. I know what it is. I'm not explaining it to you. I'm telling you the path. She looked at him. You're very calm about this. Something crossed his face. No, he said. I'm not. It was the most direct thing he'd said to her in 4 years of working together, and it landed differently than she expected, and she didn't examine that. Not tonight, not with $63,000 in fraudulent debt sitting on the table between them. I need to sleep, she said. I need to sleep. And in the morning, I need to call Marcus Hale, and I need to start from the beginning and go through every single document in order, and I need to do that before Evan realizes that I found it. He doesn't know you found it. He will. He reads my behavior. He's been reading my behavior for 3 years. A pause. He's better at it than I gave him credit for. Luca said nothing to that, which was the right response. She went to bed. She did not sleep as cleanly as the night before. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and did the math she'd been avoiding. Not the financial math, but the other kind. The math of how long. The math of when it had started. Whether the relationship itself had been the vehicle from the beginning, or whether it had started as something real and curdled, or whether she had simply been too busy being grateful someone wanted her to notice what the wanting actually looked like up close. She didn't resolve the math. She lay in the dark until the gray came back into the windows, and then she got up. Marcus Hale was in his office by 8:30. She knew because she called at 8:29, and he answered himself, no assistant, no voicemail, in a voice that said he was already 3 coffees into his morning. Luca called me last night, he said before she could introduce herself. I've been expecting you. She felt a small flicker of something she stamped out immediately. Luca had called him. Last night, after she'd gone to bed, Luca had made the call he'd told her she could make herself. She filed that, addressed it later. Then you know the broad outline, she said. I know what Luca knows, which is probably not everything. Tell me the rest. She told him. She was precise about it. Dates, account numbers, the timeline as best she could reconstruct it, the collection's notices, the email variation, the social security card in the closet. Marcus Hale listened without interrupting, which she appreciated, and when she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. You need to file a police report today, he said. Not tomorrow. Today. I'll meet you at the 7th precinct at noon. Don't touch any of the accounts. Don't close anything. Don't alert him that you know. We want the full picture before we make any moves that tip him off. He'll figure it out. He'll figure it out when we're ready for him to figure it out. Right now, you're ahead of him and you want to stay that way. She arrived at work at 9:15 with a coffee she'd made herself in Luca's kitchen, wearing a blazer she'd asked Helena to bring her the previous afternoon in a bag left at the building's front desk. No explanation. Helena had packed 3 outfits, 2 pairs of shoes, and a note that said, "Call me when you can." No rush, and Serena had held that note for longer than made practical sense. Luca was already in his office. She could see him through the glass partition, on the phone, his back half turned to the door, and she sat at her desk and did her job with the focused attention of someone who needed something to be normal for a few hours before noon. At 10:45, her desk phone rang. She looked at the caller ID, Building Security, downstairs. Ms. Vale, said the security guard, whose name she knew was Dimitri, there's a gentleman here asking for you, says his name is Evan Mercer. She felt the coffee turn to something colder in her stomach. Don't let him up, she said, and don't tell him what floor I'm on. He says he knows what floor you're on. I understand. Don't let him up anyway. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she walked to Luca's office and knocked twice and opened the door without waiting. He was off the phone. He looked at her face and said, What? He's downstairs. Luca's expression did the thing. Controlled, efficient, the visible management of something that was not calm. He reached for his desk phone. 2 calls, both short. When he was done, he said, Roland will take you to the precinct. Leave now. Use the service elevator. I'll deal with downstairs. You don't have to... Serena. His voice was even. Let me handle it. What are you going to say to him? Nothing worth repeating. A pause. Go. She went. She heard later from Roland that Evan had been escorted off the property and informed that any further attempt to access the building would result in trespassing charges. Roland recounted this with the neutral professionalism of someone who very much enjoyed his job, but understood that expressions of enjoyment were not part of the role. At the 7th Precinct, Marcus Hale was already there when she arrived. He was a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular patience of someone who had spent decades navigating institutions that were not always interested in moving quickly. He shook her hand and didn't make any visible acknowledgement of the bruise, which was fading to yellow at the edges now. The detective assigned to them was a woman named Okafor. She had short, natural hair and eyes that didn't perform sympathy but contained something steadier and more useful, the quality of someone who had heard many things and remained functional. She set a recorder on the table and said, "Start wherever you want to start." Serena started 2 years ago, with the first collections notice. She talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Okafor asked questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable. Were there any joint accounts, any legitimate shared finances, any point at which Serena had knowingly given Evan access to her financial information? Serena answered all of them honestly, including the ones that made her look less careful than she'd like. "The tracking app," Okafor said. "Did you consent to it?" "No." "You didn't install it yourself at any point, under any circumstances?" "No." "And you discovered it how?" "He told me it was there, during an argument. He said it like it was reasonable." Okafor wrote something. "When was this?" 6 months ago." "Did you remove it?" A pause. "No." Okafor looked at her, not with judgment, just with the particular attention of someone cataloging a detail. "He said if I removed it, he'd see that too, and it would mean I had something to hide, and I was—" Serena stopped, looked at the table, looked up. "I was trying to manage the situation. I thought I could manage it." "You were trying to stay safe," Marcus Hale said. "That too." Okafor kept writing. The police report took 2 more hours. When it was done, Okafor set her pen down and said, "Based on what you've described, we're looking at identity theft, financial fraud, and potentially stalking, depending on what the phone records show. The DA's office will need time to review, but this is strong." She looked at Serena directly. "The physical assault. Is there documentation? Medical records? Photographs?" "I took photographs last night. My cheekbone and my wrist. Timestamp on the photos?" "Yes." "Forward them to me. We can add the assault charge." She paused. "Miss Vale, this man has your address, your daily routine, your social network, and a financial motive to prevent you from pursuing charges. I want you to take that seriously." "I'm taking it seriously." "Where are you staying?" Serena gave Luca's building address. She watched Okafor register the address and not comment on it, which was its own kind of comment. She was back at the office by 4. The afternoon had gone strange and overlong, the way afternoons did when too much had happened in them, and she sat at her desk for 20 minutes doing nothing, which was something she almost never did. And then she pulled up the contract she'd been working on before all of this and finished it because the contract still existed and still needed to be finished, and work was the one thing in her life right now that made simple, linear sense. Luca came by at 5:30. He stopped at her desk, didn't lean against it, didn't invade the space, just stood at a professional distance that he'd always maintained with her, more carefully than she'd sometimes noticed. "How did it go?" "Police report is filed. Detective Okafor. Marcus Hale says she's good." "She is." "You know her?" "By reputation." Serena looked at him. "Luca, did you call Marcus last night after I went to bed?" A beat. "Yes." "I told you I would call him." "I know." "Then why—" "Because it was 11 at night and you'd just had one of the worst evenings of your life, and I wanted him to be ready when you called in the morning. That's all." He held her gaze. "If that was the wrong call, tell me, and I won't do it again." She held the look for a moment longer than necessary. "It wasn't the wrong call," she said. "But don't do it again." He nodded once. He walked away. She watched him walk away, and then she turned back to her screen and thought about the particular difficulty of accepting help from someone who was better at reading her needs than she'd become at naming them herself. And she thought about how much she resented that difficulty. And she thought about how much of the resentment was actually about Evan, and how much was about Luca, and how much was about the woman she'd been before either of them. And she didn't arrive at any clean answer. The next 3 days moved differently. Slower in some ways, faster in others. Marcus Hale's office sent over a forensic accountant, a quiet woman named Dr. Reyes, who wore the same gray blazer every day. Serena saw her, and who had the gift of making financial devastation feel like a solvable equation. Dr. Reyes spent 12 hours going through Serena's records and produced a document that mapped the fraud with the kind of specificity that made it real in a different way. Not emotionally real, which Serena had already processed, but legally real, time-stamped and verified and organized in the language that systems understood. The fraud had started not 14 months ago, as the first account suggested, but 22 months ago. 2 months into the relationship. Serena sat with that. She sat with it for a long time in the small conference room where Marcus had set up operations, and she didn't say anything for several minutes. And neither did Marcus or Dr. Reyes, because they understood the geometry of what that meant. That the early days, the good days, the days she still held somewhere in herself as the genuine article, had been concurrent with the beginning of the dismantling. "Was any of it real?" she said finally. Not quite a question. "That's not a determination I can make," Marcus said. "I know." She straightened. "Move on." On the 4th day, Evan found out. She didn't know precisely how he found out. Later, she'd learn it was a call from one of the fraudulent credit card companies, a customer service representative who'd tried to verify an account and triggered an alert that went to the email Evan controlled, which then sent him a notification about activity on the account, which told him that someone was pulling the thread. The sequence was frustrating and mundane, and felt insultingly small as the mechanism for what happened next. What happened next was that Evan called her from a third phone number she didn't recognize at 7 in the evening while she was at the kitchen table in the penthouse going through document scans, and this time when she answered, his voice was different. Not wounded, not defensive, not performing. Cold. "You went to the police," he said. She felt her pulse shift but kept her voice level. "Yes." "You're making a mistake." "I found the accounts, Evan." Silence on his end. She could hear him breathing, and she focused on that, the sound of his breath, the pace of it, because that told her more than the words. "Those accounts are a misunderstanding," he said. $63,000 is a misunderstanding. "I was going to pay it back, all of it." "With what?" "Serena, with what money? From what income?" "Because I've been looking at these accounts for 4 days and I cannot find a single payment toward any of them. Not one, in 22 months. The breathing changed. She heard it change. "You've been going through everything," he said. "Yes." "How long have you been planning this?" The question landed oddly, as if she were the one who had been planning something, as if the architecture of harm here were a matter of perspective. "I'm not planning anything," she said, and her voice was very steady. "I'm responding to what I found. You're at his place, aren't you?" "Not a question." "You went to him with this." "I'm handling my own situation." "You've been in his building for 4 days. You think I don't know that?" She looked at the window, the city outside, the 43 floors of distance between her and the street. "Evan," she said, "don't do anything that makes this worse for you. For me." He laughed, and the laugh was the most frightening thing she'd heard from him yet, because it had no performance in it. It was genuine. "You've already decided, haven't you? This whole thing is already decided. You just needed something to hang it on." "I found $63,000 of fraudulent debt in my name. I didn't need to find anything. You handed me everything I needed." "I'll tell them it was consensual," he said. "I'll tell them you gave me permission, joint finances. We were building a life together. It's your word against mine." "It's my word and 22 months of documented transactions against yours," she said, "and a forensic accountant, and a detective, and an attorney." The silence on his end was different now. She could feel it differently. A recalibration, the specific quality of someone running the math on a situation that has shifted under their feet. "I love you," he said, and the shift was so sudden and so complete that she felt a physical reaction to it, a cold sweep down her back, because she recognized that shift from years of living with it. The pivot, the attempt to change the weather. "I know you think that," she said. "Serena, don't call me again from unknown numbers. Don't call me at all unless it's through Marcus Hale's office." She paused. "I'm done, Evan. I'm done being the person in this situation who doesn't know what the situation actually is." She hung up. She set the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. In, out. The city burned in the windows. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear, she checked. She took a careful internal accounting and confirmed it was not fear. With the specific adrenaline of having said a true thing in the direction of a person who had spent years building a structure designed to prevent her from saying true things. She heard Luca's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. Read her immediately, the way he always read her, that specific and infuriating accuracy. "He called," she said. "I heard." "The walls aren't that thin." "I was in the hallway." She looked at him. "Were you listening in case I needed—" "Yes," he said, and the directness of it stopped her. She looked at her hands, still flat on the table. "He's going to fight it," she said. "He's going to say it was consensual. He's going to make it as ugly as he can. Let him." Luca came into the kitchen, moved to the counter, poured 2 glasses of water without asking, set one in front of her. "That's what trials are for. It could take a year, more. Probably. And you're just—" She searched for the right framing. "You're fine with me being here for a year." He looked at her steadily. "I don't want you anywhere else." It was the most unguarded thing he'd said. She could see that he knew it, the slight recalibration after the words, the awareness of having said something that crossed a line they'd both been careful about. He didn't take it back. He didn't explain it. She picked up the glass of water, drank, set it down. "I'm going to beat this," she said. "All of it. The charges, the debt, the whole thing. I'm going to build the case, and I'm going to stand in front of a jury, and I'm going to watch him lose." "I know," Luca said. "And I'm going to do it myself." "I know that too." She looked at him. He looked back. "But I'll let you make the calls in advance," she said, and there was something in it, not quite humor, not yet. The wound was too fresh for humor, but the shape of what humor might eventually look like once the wound was something she could carry rather than something that was carrying her. Luca said nothing, but something shifted at the corner of his mouth. She went back to the documents. Outside the windows, the city was indifferent and bright and ongoing, and somewhere in it Evan Mercer was recalibrating, and that recalibration would eventually produce a move, and the move would come, and when it came, she needed to be ready. For the first time in 3 years, she believed she would be ready. She was not ready. The thing about building a case, the thing Marcus Hale had tried to explain to her in the careful language of a man who had watched too many people learn this the hard way, was that the other side was also building. Every document she gathered, every timeline Dr. Reyes verified, every forensic thread she pulled tight, Evan's attorney was constructing the counter-architecture. And Evan's attorney, it turned out, was not the public defender Serena had quietly assumed he'd be left with. Evan's attorney was a woman named Claire Sutton, and Serena learned this on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks into the process, when Marcus called her at 8:15 and said, in the particular tone he used for information that required sitting down to receive, "He's retained Claire Sutton." Serena was standing at the kitchen counter. She sat down. "I know that name," she said. "Most people do." Claire Sutton had made her reputation dismantling financial fraud cases, from the defense side specifically, and with a success rate that the legal community discussed in the same tone people used for weather events and natural disasters. She was 61 years old, had white hair she wore cropped close, and was known, according to the profile Serena pulled up on her laptop 20 minutes after hanging up with Marcus, for a specific courtroom tactic. She didn't attack the evidence. She attacked the person who'd gathered it. "Where did he get the money to retain Claire Sutton?" Serena said to Marcus when she called him back. A pause that told her Marcus had already considered this. "That's a question worth asking," he said. "It took Dr. Reyes 4 days to find the answer, and when she did, she delivered it in the gray blazer with the same affect she brought to everything, which was the effect of a surgeon explaining a procedure, not without feeling, but feeling subordinated entirely to precision. There was a 7th account. One they hadn't found in the initial sweep because it wasn't in Serena's name and wasn't attached to her social security number and didn't appear on any credit report. It was a holding account, opened under a shell entity with a name that meant nothing until Dr. Reyes ran the registration and found that the registered agent was a man named Paul Mercer, Evan's brother. The account held $41,000. The fraud wasn't just to run up her debt, Dr. Reyes said, looking at Serena and Marcus across the conference table. He was liquidating, converting, taking the money out of the fraudulent accounts in cash withdrawals and small transfers and moving it into this holding account over time. The debt was left in your name. The money was moved somewhere he could access it when he needed it. Serena looked at the table. He planned to leave, she said. At some point, yes. The debt was the residue. What got left behind. She looked up. He was going to disappear, leave me with $63,000 of debt and no explanation and just go. Dr. Reyes said nothing, which was its own answer. Marcus said, "This actually strengthens the case. Intent to defraud, premeditation. The shell account is—" "I know it strengthens the case." Serena's voice came out flat. She wasn't angry, or she was angry, but the anger was underneath something colder, some new and specific understanding that was still organizing itself into a shape she could hold. I understand the legal value. I just need a minute." She got up and walked to the window of Marcus's office, which looked out over a parking structure and not the city, which was fine. She didn't need the city right now. She stood at the window and she thought about the version of herself who had believed, even after finding the accounts, even after filing the police report, even in the first hours of understanding the scale of it, that there had been something real at the foundation, that whatever the fraud was, the relationship had been separate from it, that she had been loved, even badly, even destructively, but loved. She stood at the window and she let that version of herself finish dying. It didn't take as long as she expected. She turned around. "What do we do about Claire Sutton?" she said. Marcus folded his hands on the table. "We prepare for her. We document everything. We make sure every piece of evidence is so clean she can't find a fingerprint on it. And if she goes after me personally, she will go after you personally. That's her approach. She'll suggest you're vindictive, that you're using the legal system as a weapon in a failed relationship, that the financial access was consensual or at minimum ambiguous." He met her eyes. "We prepare for that too." "What does that preparation look like?" "It looks like you on the stand being completely unshakable." She held his gaze. "I can do that." "I know you can," he said. "I've been watching you for 6 weeks." The next month was the month she became someone she hadn't been before. She didn't frame it that way at the time. At the time, it simply felt like work. The grinding, unglamorous, relentless work of building something that couldn't be broken. She met with Marcus 3 times a week. She went through every statement, every transaction, every piece of correspondence with a patience she pulled from somewhere she hadn't known she had. She had sessions with a victim's advocate named Donna, who had short red hair and no tolerance for the particular kind of self-blame that abuse survivors developed as a coping mechanism, and who said to Serena in their second session, "You didn't cause this. You can be furious about how long it took you to see it and still understand that you didn't cause it. Both things are true." Serena said, "I know that intellectually." Donna said, "Work on knowing it in your chest. That's where it matters, in a courtroom." She worked on knowing it in her chest. She was working on knowing it in her chest on the morning that Luca appeared in the doorway of the living room at 7:45 on a Wednesday and said with no preamble, "There's something you need to know." She looked up from the document she was reviewing. Something in his face, the specific quality of the stillness, the set of it, made her set the document down. "Sit down," she said. Not because she needed him to sit, but because if she was about to hear something bad, she needed the architecture of the conversation to be controlled. He sat. He set a phone on the table between them. His phone, open to something she had to lean forward to read. It was a text exchange. She read the contact name first, Claire Sutton. She looked up at him. "Read it," he said. She read it. The exchange was 2 weeks old. Sutton's first message said, "Your name has come up in this matter. We should talk before it becomes an issue." Luca's response was not there. This was Sutton's phone, a screenshot someone had sent him. But Sutton's next message said, I understand the position you're in. There are ways to manage this that don't require your direct involvement. Call me. There was a final message 4 days later from Sutton. The offer stands. Mercer is willing to give you distance in exchange for access to the financial records your office holds. Think about it. Serena read the exchange twice. She looked at Luca. She approached you, she said. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Something moved through her. Cold, specific, arriving at a destination she didn't like. You didn't tell me. I was trying to determine the extent of it before I... You didn't tell me. Not louder. Just clearer. Each word placed separately. Serena, what financial records does your office hold that Evan's attorney would want? The pause was less than a second. He was not a man who paused for long, and the fact that he paused at all told her something. When you first told me about the accounts, he said carefully, I had my own people run a parallel verification. My financial team, independent of Dr. Reyes. I wanted to understand the full scope before I wanted to understand it. She stared at him. You ran your own investigation, she said. A verification. Into my finances. Into the fraud affecting you, yes. Without telling me. Without telling you, he said, because you were in the early stages of processing a significant trauma, and I didn't want to add, don't. Her voice came out with an edge she hadn't intended and didn't retract. Don't make it about protecting me. You had my financial records examined without my knowledge or permission. And now those records, your copies, the copies your team made, are something Evan's attorney knows about and is trying to access. She won't access them. That's not the point. I know. The point is that you did this without telling me. The point is that I am standing in front of a jury in... She checked the calendar in her head. 11 weeks, and I am going to be presented as a woman who has been controlled and surveilled and had her autonomy systematically stripped by a man who thought he knew what was best for her, and now I find out that another man who I trusted... She stopped. The silence was very complete. Luca was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, or rather she had seen the components of it separately. The restraint, the awareness, the particular gravity he carried, but never assembled like this, never in combination, never directed at her with this specific and undefended clarity. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected justification, or the soft variety of justification that sounded like explanation, and the absence of it disarmed her in a way she resented. I did what I do, he said. I gather information. I act on it. I make decisions inside situations that involve people I care about without asking those people whether they want me making decisions. It's a thing I do. It's a problem. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. The records your team has, she said. I need them. All of them. Everything your people found that Marcus and Dr. Reyes might not have. I'll have them transferred by end of day. And I need to know if Sutton makes contact again. Immediately. And I need you to understand... She stopped. Reorganized. This case is mine. The decisions in it are mine. Your job is the security perimeter and the apartment I'm staying in the name of a good forensic accountant, which I've already used. Your job is not to investigate on my behalf without my knowledge. Understood, he said. I mean it. I know you mean it. I know you mean... She picked up the document she'd set down and then put it back down because she couldn't read it right now. The words were there, but the processing wasn't. How did you get Sutton's screenshot? She said. I have a source. In her office? He said nothing, which was its own answer. She thought about asking more and decided not to. There were categories of Luca Moretti's operational life that she had spent 4 years professionally adjacent to and deliberately uninvestigated, and she was going to continue that policy because she needed the energy she had for the war in front of her and not for the one beside her. She took the documents to Marcus that afternoon. Marcus read through Luca's team's findings with the focused speed of a man who processed legal documents the way other people processed oxygen, and when he was done, he set the stack down and looked at her with an expression she didn't immediately read. There's something in here, he said. What? He turned 3 pages back, pointed. She leaned over and read. The record was a transaction log from one of the fraudulent accounts, one they'd already cataloged, but Luca's team had cross-referenced it with something Dr. Reyes hadn't thought to check. The account that had received the wire transfers wasn't the Paul Mercer Shell account. Not all of them. 4 transfers totaling $9,000 had gone somewhere else. The receiving account was registered to a woman named Dana Willows. Serena didn't know that name. She said so. Marcus turned another page. A photograph, printed, from what source she didn't ask, of a woman in her 30s with dark hair and a face that was pleasant and unremarkable in the way of someone who had never been the main character of anything. She's been seeing Evan for approximately 2 years, Marcus said, overlapping entirely with your relationship. The room was very quiet. He was funding her, Serena said. Partially, yes. With my money. With the money he took in your name? Yes. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the math she'd done in the dark, in the guest room of Luca's penthouse, in the early days. The math about whether any of it had been real. She thought about the conclusion she'd reached standing at Marcus's parking structure window, the quiet death of the version of herself that needed it to have been real. She had thought she'd finished that, had thought she'd done the work of it. She had not finished it. Because there was a difference, she understood now, between knowing that something was a transaction and knowing that you had been, specifically, the transaction. That while she was managing his calendar and defending him to Helena and lying in the dark trying to figure out what she was doing wrong, he was wiring her money borrowed fraudulently in her name, to another woman. Had been doing it for 2 years. Had been doing it from the beginning. The cold that moved through her now was a different kind than before. Not the cold of shock, the cold of something final. Does Sutton know we have this? She said. She shouldn't, but she will. Once we file the amended charges, when do we file? I want another 72 hours to verify the Dana Willows connection fully. Make sure it's airtight before we put it in front of the DA. 72 hours, she said. Fine. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at Marcus. He's not going to take a deal, she said. Is he? Marcus considered his answer. Sutton's approach, going after you personally, trying to access Moretti's records, suggests he's planning to fight. He thinks he can make you look unreliable enough that the jury has reasonable doubt. He thinks he still knows how I work, she said. Probably. She thought about that, about the specific confidence of a man who had spent 3 years mapping her psychology, cataloging her reactions, learning the precise coordinates of her self-doubt, and who was now planning to use that map in a courtroom. The map was out of date. She walked out of Marcus's office into the afternoon, into the ordinary business of the city moving around her, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not the thing Donna had been working on, or not only that, but something harder and more structural. The thing that happened when a person finally stopped organizing their life around managing someone else's perception of them. She had been afraid of this trial. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was 4 blocks from the office when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The 4th new unknown number Evan had used since she'd blocked the others. She looked at it. She didn't answer. She watched it ring out, and then she opened her contacts and added the number to the block list and kept walking. It buzzed again. Text this time. She read it without stopping walking. Dana is going to testify that you knew. She's going to say you gave Evan access. She'll say it was an arrangement. Think about what that does to your case. She stopped walking. She read it again. Donna Willows, who Evan had been funding with Serena's stolen money, who was now apparently willing to stand in a courtroom and provide a false account that would reframe the entire case, transform Serena from victim to willing participant, from the person who had been defrauded to the person who had constructed the fraud. She stood on the sidewalk with people moving around her, and she thought, with clarity that surprised her with its temperature, about what it meant that he had planned for this. That Dana Willows was not a last resort, but a preparation. That somewhere in the last months, while Serena was building her case brick by careful brick, Evan had been building his, and his included a witness who would look at a jury and lie to a jury, and Serena would have no way to stop her unless she found something first. She called Marcus from the sidewalk. He has a witness, she said when he picked up. Dana Willows. He's going to put her on the stand to say the financial access was consensual. That I knew. Marcus was quiet for 2 seconds. When did you get this? Just now. Text from an unknown number. Forward it to me immediately. Don't delete it. Don't respond. A pause. Short. Controlled. Serena, this is actually a mistake on his part. How is this a mistake? Because he just told you his strategy. That means either he's panicking or Sutton doesn't know he sent that text, or both. She could hear him already moving, already recalibrating. Come back to the office. We have 72 hours and we just got a gift. She turned around and walked back the way she'd come. The 72 hours that followed were the most concentrated work of her life. Dr. Reyes found the receipts first. Payment confirmations showing transfers from the Dana Willows account back into a third-party platform, which then routed micropayments to a prepaid card registered to a P.O. box in Evan's name. Dana wasn't just a recipient. Dana had been returning a percentage, a cut, structured through enough layers to look like noise if you weren't looking specifically for it. She was being paid to testify. Marcus took that to the DA's office on a Thursday afternoon. Serena sat in the waiting area of the district attorney's building on a plastic chair and drank bad coffee and waited. And when Marcus came out 45 minutes later, his face told her something had changed. They're adding charges, he said. Witness tampering, conspiracy. The DA wants to move the trial date up. Up to when? 3 weeks. She absorbed that. 3 weeks instead of 11. 3 weeks to be unshakable. Okay, she said. Serena, I said okay. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd seen on his face only a few times before, something close to admiration, though he was too professional to name it. Okay, he said. The trial began on a Monday in January, when the city was iron gray and cold, the kind of cold that came in under doors and lived in your back and made everything feel harder than it was. Serena wore a charcoal suit she'd bought herself, alone, on a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks prior. Had walked into the store and stood in front of mirrors until she found the thing that said exactly what she needed it to say, which was not victim and not aggressor, but something in the clean, unbothered middle. Something that said, I am here, I know what happened, and I am not afraid of any of you. She wore it into the courthouse with her shoulders level and her hands still. The prosecution's opening was methodical, precise. The assistant DA was a lean man in his 40s named Carver, who had the particular courtroom quality of someone who trusted the evidence more than his own performance, and Serena appreciated that about him. The restraint, the confidence of not overselling. He laid the timeline, the accounts, the transfers, the shell entity. Dana Willows, 22 months of documented, forensically verified fraud. Claire Sutton's opening was something else entirely. She stood at the podium with the economy of someone who had no excess moves in her arsenal, and she looked at the jury with the white-haired authority of a woman who had been in more courtrooms than most of the people in the room, and she said, in a voice that was almost conversational, what you're going to hear over the next several days is the story of a relationship that ended badly, and the story of one of the parties in that relationship deciding to use the legal system to finish what the breakup started. Serena's jaw was level. She had practiced this. The jaw, the hands, the particular arrangement of her face during Sutton's opening that expressed attentiveness without distress. Donna had run her through it. Marcus had run her through it. She had sat in front of a mirror and practiced being looked at. You're going to hear words like fraud and identity theft, Sutton continued. What you're not going to hear, because the prosecution doesn't want you to think about it, is that Serena Vale was a sophisticated professional woman who shared her financial life with a partner she claimed to love, and who is now, after the relationship failed on its own terms, characterizing that shared financial access as criminal. The jury was watching. 12 faces, some attentive, some carefully neutral, one woman in the second row whose expression Serena couldn't read and spent too much energy trying to read for the first 2 days. The first witness was Dr. Reyes. She wore the gray blazer. She sat in the stand with the precision of a surgeon and walked Carver through 22 months of documented fraud with the patience of someone explaining arithmetic to a classroom. Every account, every transfer, every date, the forensic methodology, the shell entity, the Paul Mercer registration, the $9,000 routed to Dana Willows. Sutton cross-examined for 2 hours. It was, Serena thought, like watching someone try to cut water. Sutton came at the methodology, the software, the potential for error in digital forensic reconstruction. She was technically sophisticated and clearly had her own expert waiting. But Dr. Reyes answered every question with the same flat, consistent precision, and by the end of the cross, Sutton had made no visible dent. The second day was harder. The second day was Serena. She walked to the stand and sat down and looked at the room, at Carver, at the jury, at Evan across the room in his suit, looking at her with an expression she had spent enough time studying to know was performed. And she said her name and her occupation for the record, and she answered Carver's questions. She answered all of them. The early days of the relationship, the first signs she'd missed, the tracking app, the isolation from her network, the collections notice she hadn't followed up on, the night in October when his hand had connected with her face. Carver asked her to describe what she'd found when she pulled her credit report. She described it, number by number, account by account, 22 months backward through the careful dismantling of her financial identity. "How did you feel," Carver asked, "when you understood the full scope of what had been done?" She looked at the jury. She thought about what Donna had said, know it in your chest, and she found it, the actual thing, not the performance of it. "Like I'd been living in a house someone had been quietly burning down from the basement for 2 years," she said, "and I'd been upstairs the whole time wondering why it kept getting harder to breathe." The woman in the second row blinked, then Sutton stood up. The cross-examination took 3 hours and 20 minutes across 2 sessions, with a lunch break in the middle during which Serena sat in a conference room with Marcus and drank water and said almost nothing, and Marcus said almost nothing back because he understood that she didn't need strategy right now. She needed quiet. Sutton was precise and relentless and patient. She established that Serena had a key to the apartment where Evan lived for part of the relationship. She established that Serena had been present in the same apartment as the file box containing her Social Security card on numerous occasions. She established that Serena had not checked her credit report in over a year prior to the discovery. She asked whether Serena had ever given Evan access to her email. Serena said no. Sutton asked whether Evan had ever used Serena's laptop. Serena said yes. Sutton asked whether Serena had ever been present when he used her laptop. Serena said yes. "And you never saw him access financial accounts?" "No." "In 2 years of cohabitation, you never once observed him using your laptop to access financial institutions in your name?" "That's correct." "Isn't it possible," Sutton said, with the even tone of someone not really asking a question, but installing one into the jury's mind, that what you're describing as surveillance and control was simply attentiveness, concern, the behavior of a partner who is worried about the relationship?" "No," Serena said. "No?" "No. Tracking someone's location without consent isn't attentiveness. Cutting someone off from their support network isn't concern. And opening fraudulent accounts in someone's name isn't love, Ms. Sutton. I understand that framing those things as ambiguous is your job, but I was there, and they weren't ambiguous." Sutton let a beat pass. "Ms. Vale, isn't it true that you are currently residing in the home of Luca Moretti, your employer?" The room temperature changed. "Yes," Serena said, "have been residing there for approximately 3 months." "Yes." "And Mr. Moretti's company conducted its own financial investigation into the accounts in question, independent of law enforcement." "I'm aware of that." "Did you authorize that investigation?" A pause. 1 beat. "I was informed of it after the fact." "So Mr. Moretti had your private financial records examined without your explicit authorization." Carver was on his feet. "Objection. Relevance. Weight of the witness's credibility, Your Honor. She's asking this jury to believe she was controlled by one man while living under another man's roof under similar circumstances." The judge, a compact woman named Farrow, with the expression of someone who had been irritated by clever arguments than this, said, "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Ms. Vale." Serena looked at Sutton. She felt the trap, its shape, its edges, the specific way it had been constructed to make her look like a woman who moved from one man's control to another and called it freedom. "Mr. Moretti had records examined without my explicit knowledge," she said, with the evenness of someone who had found the floor under this particular question and was standing on it. "When I discovered this, I addressed it directly. I told him it was not acceptable. He agreed. The records were transferred to my legal team." She held Sutton's gaze. "That conversation, where I identified an overreach, named it, and the person who committed it acknowledged it and corrected it, is not the same as 2 years of documented fraud, financial exploitation, physical assault, and witness tampering. I understand it serves your argument to suggest otherwise. Sutton let the silence sit for a moment. Then, nothing further. The lunch break after Serena's testimony was the first time she let herself feel the physical cost of it. She sat in the conference room and her hands were shaking in a way she hadn't let them shake on the stand, and Marcus brought her a sandwich she didn't eat and coffee she held with both hands until the shaking slowed. Her back hurt. Her jaw hurt from the sustained effort of holding it level. There was a headache behind her left eye that had been there since morning. "You were good," Marcus said. "I know," she said, and it wasn't arrogance, just accounting. Dana Willows took the stand the following morning. She was, in person, exactly what her photograph had suggested. A woman whose face showed the effort of not showing things. She wore a blue dress and her dark hair pulled back, and she sat in the stand with her hands folded and answered Sutton's questions in a voice that was low and measured and almost convincing. She said Serena had known, said Evan had told her Serena was aware of the accounts, that they'd discussed it, that it was an arrangement both parties understood. She was specific about dates, about conversations she claimed Evan had described to her. She was detailed in a way that Serena recognized immediately as rehearsed. The details too consistent, too cleanly recalled, the narrative too structurally neat. Serena sat at the prosecution table and watched Dana Willows describe a version of her life that had never existed, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was a specific, cold variety of grief, not for herself, not for the fraud or the assault or the financial destruction, but for the girl she'd been when she'd first believed Evan Mercer loved her, for how long that belief had survived everything it had no business surviving. Then Carver stood up. He established the return payments first, laid the receipts out on the screen with the same patient arithmetic he brought to everything, and watched Dana Willow's careful neutrality develop a fracture around the edges as the numbers appeared. "Ms. Willows, are you aware that digital forensic analysis of your financial records, subpoenaed by this court 2 weeks ago, shows 14 payments routed from your account to a prepaid card registered to Mr. Mercer?" Her hands shifted in her lap. "Those were personal." "The payments? Between me and Evan, yes. Payments from your account to his card totaling approximately $4,300 in the 6 weeks following the filing of charges against Mr. Mercer in this case. I was helping him with legal fees, with money that originated in transfers from Mr. Mercer to your account, which originated in accounts opened fraudulently in Serena Vale's name." Dana Willows looked at Sutton. Sutton's face gave nothing. "Ms. Willows," Carver said, and his voice had dropped a register, "are you currently under investigation for witness tampering?" The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds and felt like considerably longer. "I've been advised by counsel," she started. "You can answer yes or no." Her jaw worked. "Yes." The fracture in the room was audible, not a sound exactly, but a pressure shift, the way certain silences have a texture. Serena felt it in her chest. The jury was looking at Dana Willows with an expression that 12 different faces can share when they've arrived simultaneously at the same conclusion. Evan's composure broke in increments over the next 2 days as the prosecution's remaining witnesses dismantled the last structural supports of Sutton's alternative narrative. The forensic technician who testified about the email variation, Serena.Vale92, the ghost account, the routing of correspondence. The bank fraud specialist who testified about the methodology of the shell account. The detective Okafor, who described Serena's condition on the night the police report was filed with the flat documented specificity of someone whose job it was to record the aftermath of things. Serena watched Evan across the room through all of it. She watched him the way you watch weather, not with dread, just with the sustained attention of someone needing to know what it was going to do next. His composure had been excellent in the first days. It eroded. She could see it eroding in the incremental tightening around his eyes, the way his hands moved differently, the way he leaned towards Sutton in whispered exchanges that grew longer and more urgent as the week progressed. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 40 minutes. She sat in the corridor outside the courtroom during those hours with Marcus on one side and a styrofoam cup of coffee on the other, and she didn't talk much. Helena had texted. Donna had texted. Luca had not texted, which she'd come to understand was his specific mode of respecting the space she'd asked for. Not absence exactly, more like proximity without pressure. And she'd stopped resenting it somewhere around week 3 and started finding it, against her better judgment, something close to sustaining. The verdict came at 4:47 in the afternoon. Guilty. All counts. Identity theft, financial fraud, forgery, physical assault, conspiracy to commit witness tampering. Each count read out in the flat procedural voice of the court clerk, each one landing in the room like something solid. She heard Evan make a sound. She didn't look at him. She looked at the jury instead, at the woman in the second row, whose expression she had spent 2 days failing to read, and who was looking at Serena now with something unambiguous and clean. Outside the courthouse, the air was bitter and gray, and she stood on the front steps with her charcoal suit and her still hands, and she breathed it in. Marcus was on his phone. People moved past. The city was indifferent, as cities always were, already going about its ongoing business. She thought about calling someone. Didn't. Just stood there for a minute, breathing cold air, feeling the strange, specific weight of a thing that has been finished. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number again, but the text itself was only 4 words, and she read it twice before the meaning of it reached her fully, before the cold that moved through her was not relief, but something else entirely. Something that undid the last 3 hours in a single, "He's out." 4 words, no punctuation, no name. But she knew the number. It was Marcus's emergency line, the one he'd given her at the start of all this, with the specific instruction that she would only ever receive a text from it if something required immediate action. She stood on the courthouse steps in the bitter January air and read those 4 words and felt the verdict. 3 hours and 47 minutes of jury deliberation, guilty on all counts, the clean procedural weight of it, dissolve into something colder and less finished than she'd believed it was going to be. Marcus was at her shoulder in under a minute. His phone was already at his ear. "When?" he said into it. "How?" A pause. "Get me the transport log." She looked at him. "Courthouse transfer," he said, covering the phone. They were moving him to county processing. The vehicle was in an accident on the Harmon overpass. Single car, rear collision. He walked away from it. He walked away. 40 minutes ago. She stood completely still for a moment. The cold moved through the charcoal suit like it wasn't there. Around her, the city continued its indifferent business. A cab moving through an intersection, a woman walking fast with a paper bag, 2 men in construction vests talking over a barrier, and none of it had any idea that the thing she'd spent 5 months building and standing in front of and refusing to be dismantled by had just produced a verdict that a man had already walked away from. "Serena," Marcus's voice, "we need to move." She moved. Roland was at the curb in under 4 minutes. She didn't ask how he knew. She got in the car and Marcus got in beside her, and Roland pulled into traffic with the particular efficiency of someone who had been briefed and was already working. Luca's voice came through the car speaker without her calling him. Roland had connected it. "I know," she said before he could speak. "The building is secure," he said. "My team has the perimeter. Okafor has a BOLO out. Marshals are coordinating. Where are you?" "In the car." "Come here." She looked out the window at the gray city moving past. "No." A beat. "Serena, I'm not spending this in your apartment. I'm not. I did that. I did the hiding. I did the waiting for it to be over." Her voice was level. She was proud of the level. "I need to know what he's going to do, and I need to be somewhere I can think. You can think here. I can think better when I'm not protected quite so completely." The silence on the speaker had a quality she recognized. The specific quality of Luca Moretti deciding not to say a thing he'd decided to say. "Marcus is with you," he said finally. "Marcus is with me. I want Roland to stay on you." "Roland can stay on me." Another pause. "The marshals will want you in a secure location. The marshals can recommend. They can't require." She looked at the speaker as if she could look at him through it. "I'll call you when there's something to call about." She hung up, or rather she nodded at Roland, who disconnected the call, and she sat back in the seat and looked at the gray sky above the buildings and thought about what Evan Mercer did when his plans collapsed. She had 3 years of data on this. The tracking, the isolation, the fraud. None of it had been impulsive. All of it had been constructed over time with a patience that she'd mistaken for love, and which she now understood was simply the patience of someone for whom the outcome was worth the wait. Evan didn't act in rage. He acted in calculation, which meant he had a next move. She called Okafor directly. He hasn't made contact with any known numbers, Okafor said, without preamble. We're covering the apartment on Caldwell, his brother's address, Dana Willows' last known. We have his financial picture, so the account his brother held is frozen. The prepaid card is under watch. He has limited access to cash. He has 40 minutes on us, Serena said. I know. He's not going to run. He's not that kind of angry. She looked out the window. He came out of a traffic accident, and the first thing he did was not run. He's going to come for something. We're taking that seriously, Okafor said. Are you taking it seriously enough to have someone on Helena Marsh? A brief silence. Your colleague. He knows about her. He knows she matters to me. He's been watching my network for 3 years. He knows who's still in it. A pause. And Donna Reyes. My advocate. He'd know about her too, the same way he knew about everything. I'll get people on both, Okafor said, and the absence of argument in her voice told Serena that the detective had already been thinking along the same lines and was relieved to have it confirmed. She spent the next 4 hours in Marcus's office. She could have gone to a hotel, could have gone to the building Luca had offered, could have accepted the 43rd floor and the floor-to-ceiling windows and the particular feeling of safe that she'd learned, over months, to stop associating with weakness. But she needed to work, and working meant the documents, the files, the structured activity of doing something instead of waiting for something to be done to her. Marcus brought in sandwiches at 7. She ate half of one without tasting it. At 8:43, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The name on it was Helena Marsh, and the call connected before she consciously decided to connect it, and what she heard in the first second. Background noise, movement, the specific acoustic quality of a person who was not in a safe place made her stand up from the chair with her whole body before her brain had fully processed the information. Helena. A breath. He's here. Low. Controlled. The voice of someone keeping the volume down on purpose. He came to my building. I didn't open the door, but he's in the hallway and he's... Don't open the door, Serena said. Helena, do not open the door. What floor are you on? 7th, Serena. I can hear him outside. Marcus was already on his other phone. She heard him say Okafor's name. Lock your bathroom, Serena said. Take your phone and go into your bathroom and lock the door. The door between you and the hallway is enough. He can't get through 2 locked doors quietly. Okay. A rustling sound. Movement. Okay, a knock. Through the phone, close and loud. Helena made a sharp intake of breath. Helena. Serena's voice dropped to the register she'd developed in the courtroom, the register that said, I am here, I am certain, do not deviate from this frequency. He's trying to make you react. Don't react, just breathe. Serena. Evan's voice. Through the phone, muffled by whatever door was between Helena and the hallway. I know you're listening. She sat very still. Serena. Louder now. Controlled, still. She'd been right about the calculation. You want to talk? Let's talk. Come here. Just you. Or I keep working through your list. Marcus put his hand over his second phone. Okafor has a car 6 minutes out. 6 minutes. She looked at the wall of Marcus's office, at the framed certificate she'd looked at 100 times in the last 5 months without seeing it, and she thought about 6 minutes and what they contained and what she was willing to let them contain. She took the phone away from her ear. Marcus, she said, where's the address? Serena. Helena's building. Give me the address. No. He said it with the flat authority of someone who understood exactly what was being asked and exactly why it was not acceptable. No, Okafor is 6 minutes out. You are going to stay in this office. He's going to keep going down the list, she said. He told me that. He's going to keep going down the list until someone opens a door. She looked at Marcus. Helena won't, but he's going to keep going, and there are other people on the list, and not all of them are as steady as Helena. You are not the solution to this situation. I'm the only variable he's accounting for. He doesn't care about Marshall's or Okafor's team. He's done the math, and he's decided that the exposure is worth it if he gets to... She stopped. Finished the sentence differently. If he gets to reframe this. In his head, showing up here, making me come to him, that's not losing. That's the last move of someone who has decided that the ending he gets is better than the one he's currently looking at. Marcus stared at her. 6 minutes, he said. Drive me there, she said. I'll be in the car until Okafor arrives, but I need to be there. He drove her there. Roland drove, technically, and Marcus sat beside her in the back with the expression of a man doing something he knew was professionally inadvisable because the alternative was letting her get in a cab. They were 4 minutes out when her phone buzzed again. Luca. She answered. I know where you're going, he said. How? Roland. She looked at the back of Roland's head. Roland's expression, visible in the rear view, was the expression of a man who had made a judgment call and was at peace with it. I'm not going inside, she said to Luca. I'm going to be in the car until... He came out of a collision, and his first move was to find the people who matter to you, Luca said, and his voice had a quality in it she hadn't heard before. Not anger, not the controlled management of anger, something rawer and more unguarded than that. Serena, please tell me you understand what that means about what he's willing to do. I understand completely, she said. That's why I'm going. A silence. My team is 2 minutes behind you, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. Luca, they'll stay on the perimeter. They won't engage unless... He stopped. When he continued, his voice had something in it that cost him. Just tell me you're going to be careful. I'm going to be careful, she said. She meant it. The car pulled up to Helena's building as the first of Okafor's vehicles rounded the opposite corner, lights cutting through the dark. Roland stopped at the curb, and she was out of the car before Marcus finished saying her name. The building's lobby was empty. The elevator was open. She took the stairs. She came out on the 7th floor, and the hallway was empty except for Evan. He was standing outside Helena's door, jacket dark, hair that same rain damp she'd last seen in October when all of this had been, still, technically manageable. He turned when the stairwell door opened. He looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, and she cataloged it in the second she had before she had to speak. Something stripped of performance, stripped of the particular management he'd always applied to how he presented himself to her. Something underneath all of that which was simply tired. He was tired. She was tired. You came, he said. Helena goes back to her apartment unharmed, she said. That's the only sentence that matters right now. I wasn't going to... I know what you were going to do. You were going to knock until she reacted, or someone else on the floor called building security, or you got what you actually came for, which was this. She gestured between them. Me. Out of the building I was in. On your terms. He looked at her for a long moment. You sound different. I am different. Since when? Since October, she said. Since I sat on the floor of our kitchen and decided I was done being the person in situations who doesn't know what the situation actually is. Something moved through his face, not guilt. She'd given up expecting guilt from him somewhere around month 2 of building the case. Something more like recognition, like a man looking at the distance between what he'd anticipated and what he was actually standing in front of. The verdict doesn't hold, he said. Sutton's filing the appeal tonight. Evan. She has grounds. The forensic methodology, the way they subpoenaed Dana's records. There are procedural. Evan. Her voice was quiet and absolutely level. Stop. He stopped. You're standing in a hallway you don't live in, she said, outside the door of a woman who has nothing to do with anything between us. And there are federal marshals in the stairwell behind me, and they are waiting for me to take one step back. She held his gaze. You have one choice right now, just one. And it's not about me, and it's not about the appeal, and it's not about any version of this story where you get to reframe the ending. His jaw tightened. I loved you. I know you believe that. I did. Whatever else happened, I did. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she'd learned to look at difficult things, without flinching, without rushing to look away, but also without letting the looking become more than it was. I know the part you felt was real, she said. That doesn't change the 22 months. That doesn't change the $63,000. That doesn't change Helena standing in her bathroom right now with her heart going 150 beats a minute because you decided her fear was a useful tool. She paused. The part that was real and the part that was destruction can both be true. I've had 5 months to understand that. You're going to have a lot longer. His hands, at his sides, opened and closed once. Behind her she heard the stairwell door. Mr. Mercer, Okafor's voice. Steady, professional, the voice of someone who had been doing this long enough that adrenaline had become background noise. Step away from the door and put your hands where I can see them. Serena didn't move. She held Evan's gaze for one more second, the last second she was going to give it, the last moment she was going to be in the same hallway as the architecture of the last 3 years. And then she stepped to the side and let Okafor through. He didn't run. She'd known he wouldn't. She'd told Marcus in the car that he wouldn't run, and she'd been right. And being right about it felt like nothing at all, which was maybe the most accurate feeling she'd had about him in a long time. He put his hands up. He was cuffed efficiently, walked toward the elevator, and she watched his back until the elevator doors closed, and then she walked to Helena's door and knocked twice. "Helena, it's me. It's over." The lock turned. The door opened. Helena, still in her work clothes, her face doing the thing faces did after sustained fear, the particular recomposition, the effort of returning to a state that looked normal, looked at Serena for 1 second and then put her arms around her. Serena stood in Helena's doorway and let herself be held, and she did not cry because the crying had already happened, months ago, in increments, alone and otherwise, and what she felt now was not the shape of crying, but something quieter and more complete. "I'm okay," Helena said into her shoulder. "I know," Serena said. "I know you are." The months that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing about Aftermath. It didn't have the shape of the thing that preceded it. It was ordinary and slow and occasionally boring and occasionally hard in the small, unglamorous ways that didn't translate to anything cinematic. She found an apartment across town, 3rd floor, east-facing windows that got morning light, a kitchen with the kind of counter space she'd always wanted and never had. She painted the walls herself over a long weekend in February with Helena, both of them covered in a color called Harbor Gray that had looked different on the swatch and which looked exactly right on the walls. She went back to work. The work was the same: contracts, logistics, the operational machinery of Moretti Group. And she was better at it than she'd been before, which surprised her until she understood the reason, which was that she was no longer spending a significant portion of her cognitive capacity managing the temperature of someone else's moods. The available bandwidth was remarkable. The appeal Sutton filed was denied in March. Evan began his sentence on a Tuesday. Marcus called her to tell her. She was at her desk. She thanked him. She went back to work. The debt was resolved through a combination of the asset recovery from the frozen accounts, the restitution order as part of sentencing, and a civil judgment that Marcus's office had pursued simultaneously. It took 8 months to clear in full. She watched the number decrease on her credit report the way you watched anything that had been wrong for a long time slowly become right, with a satisfaction that was real but quiet, without the drama you expected it to have. She started painting again. Not professionally. She'd painted in college, had stopped somewhere in her mid-20s when the time for it disappeared, and discovered when she picked it up again that she was worse than she remembered, and also that she didn't care. She painted on Sunday mornings in the Harbor Gray apartment with the east-facing light coming in and music playing and nobody asking her where she was going or when she'd be back. In April, she went to Portugal alone. 5 days. She walked along the coast of Cascais and ate grilled fish at a table outside and read a novel she'd been meaning to read for 2 years and slept 8 hours every night in a small hotel room with the window cracked. She brought back a ceramic piece she found in a market, rough-edged, uneven, the particular beauty of something made by hand without trying too hard to be beautiful, and put it on the kitchen windowsill where it caught the morning light. She was better. She was herself again, or rather she was a version of herself that had the same essential architecture as the woman before, but had been stress-tested in ways that changed the material. Not harder, exactly. More honest about where the weight was and where it wasn't. She thought about Luca occasionally. She thought about him the way she thought about all the things that had existed in the acute phase of the crisis, with gratitude that was real and complicated and not something she was in a hurry to act on. She saw him at work every day. They were, still and again, professional, careful. They had the same 4 years of working history and the additional layer of what the last year had been, and both of those things sat between them with the density of things that had been lived. He didn't push. He had never pushed. That was still, she thought, the most accurate thing she knew about him. She came into his office on a Thursday morning in May, wearing a sapphire blue dress she'd bought in Cascais from a shop on a side street where the woman behind the counter had held it up against Serena's coloring and said, In accented English, "This one, yes." She'd bought it without trying it on because sometimes you just knew. She closed the door behind her. Luca looked up from the desk. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the attention he brought to everything, nothing withheld. And then something shifted in his expression that had nothing to do with professional management. "That's new?" he said. "Portugal," she said. "I bought it in Cascais." He waited. He was good at waiting. He had always been good at waiting, and she had spent a long time understanding the difference between waiting as a form of control and waiting as a form of respect for someone else's timing. Luca's waiting had always been the second kind. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, not the chair she usually sat in for work, which was angled toward the window and the files, the chair directly across from him. "I owe you an apology," she said. He started to say something. She held up one hand. "Let me." She looked at him directly. "When you had the records examined, when I found out, I was right to be angry. I was right about what it was, and you were right to acknowledge it and correct it." She held his gaze. "But I also used it afterward. I used it as a reason to keep the distance I was already keeping, because it was easier to have a legitimate grievance than to look at what was actually in the way." He was very still. The particular stillness. "What was actually in the way?" he said. "I didn't trust myself," she said. "I'd spent 3 years having my own instincts systematically replaced with someone else's version of them. And my instincts about you were—" She stopped, found the honest version. "Loud, from early on. And I didn't trust them because I'd been wrong about being right before." The morning light came through the office windows, and the city sat below them, ongoing and indifferent. And Luca Moretti looked at her across his desk with 4 years of maintained distance and everything that had accumulated on the other side of it. "The night you called me," he said. "Yes, I was in the car before you finished telling me the address." He said it with the directness of someone who had decided that the time for managing this particular truth had passed. "I want you to know that. It wasn't obligation. It wasn't the employer thing. The gravity of it between us had been there for a long time, and I decided that it was something I was never going to act on because the power differential—" "I know," she said. "You were my employee. I had decided that meant something permanent. And then I called you at midnight from the floor of my kitchen. And then you called me," he said, "and I understood that the careful professional decision I'd made was that it was going to cost something I couldn't afford to lose." She looked at him. This man who had answered at midnight without sounding surprised to be awake, who had arrived in 19 minutes, who had sat across a kitchen table at 11 at night and said, "Show me from the beginning," who had made the wrong call once, acknowledged it without justification, and never repeated it. "I'm not the same person I was in October," she said. "I know. I need you to know I'm not choosing this because of what you did, what you provided. I need to be clear about that. You've been clear about that since the night you told me not to make calls in advance," he said, and there was something at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was the closest she'd seen him come to one in a long time. "You've never been unclear about anything, Serena. That's not actually the problem you think it is." She looked at her hands for a moment. The apartment on Caldwell Street, the kitchen floor, the 19 minutes, the credit report, the courtroom, the hallway on the 7th floor. Everything that had happened between October and this May morning, everything it had cost, everything it had returned to her that she hadn't known she'd lost. She looked up. "I'm ready," she said. He stood. She stood. The desk between them was the last formal thing, and then it wasn't because he came around it and the distance they'd maintained for 4 years, and some change collapsed in the way of things that have been held too long. Not dramatically, not with the kind of urgency that made for good performance, but with the particular honesty of 2 people who had been patient long enough. He put his hands on her face, carefully, the same hands that had cleaned a cut on her cheekbone in a guest room months ago with steady efficiency and careful distance, and she felt, under his palms, the particular sensation of being held by someone who was holding you because they chose to, and not because they needed to, and the difference was everything. She kissed him with the full weight of what the year had been, not gracefully, not without the salt water of exhaustion and grief that lived in the back of every good thing she'd touched since October. And he kissed her back with the patience of someone who had been waiting long enough to understand that what he was getting was worth everything he'd waited through. Outside, the city continued. 3 months later, he took her to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on an evening in late August, when the city below was lit in the particular gold of a sky that couldn't quite decide between day and dark. She had been in that apartment many times since May, and it had stopped feeling like the place where her new life had started and started feeling like the place where the life she was currently in simply existed, which was the more accurate description. He went to one knee on the hardwood floor with the city burning behind him, and she looked at him, looking at her, and she felt the full length of the last year, the weight of it, and the specific way weight changes when you've carried it long enough, when it stops being burden and starts being simply what you are made of now. "I'm not asking you to belong to me," he said. "I'm asking you to choose me. Every day. The same way I'll choose you." She stood in the sapphire blue dress she'd worn again for tonight, the Cascades dress, the dress she'd bought alone in a shop where someone had held it up and said yes. And she looked at the man kneeling in front of her with the city in the windows and the full, complex, imperfect truth of who they both were between them, and she said yes. Not because she needed saving, she had done that herself. Not because she owed him. The debt had never been that kind. Because he had waited at the precise distance she needed him to wait, and then, when she came to him, had been exactly where he said he'd be. The city burned on below them, golden and indifferent and ongoing. And Serena Vale, who had arrived broken on a rainy Tuesday in October with a bruise on her face and $63,000 of debt she hadn't made, who had built the case herself and stood on the stand herself and walked down a 7th-floor hallway herself when it wasn't over yet, stood in the late August light and understood that the greatest thing she'd ever recovered wasn't the money or her name or her credit or her standing. It was the knowledge that she had never, at any point, stopped being someone worth recovering. She held out her hand. He put the ring on it. Outside, the city continued, as cities do, unaware and burning, full of people in apartments and hallways and courtrooms and cars making the choices that would become the architecture of whatever they were going to be next. And that was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough. Fade out.